Hi there, I'm Nate Kokernot and welcome again to my channel. So I'm deep into a new playlist on the Hermetic Principles, which are very instructive about basically how the world is experienced. This was science before there was science, before Isaac Newton came along, and kind of limited science to the assumption that space and time are fundamentally real, and therefore anything out of bounds of space and time as like a causative effect on the experiences that we're having in the world would be considered supernatural and not allowed, basically. But there are still scientists out there who are curious enough to allow for the possibility that there are hidden variables outside of space and time that could have causative effects. But I'm going to introduce today the fifth Hermetic principle, which is called rhythm. And in the Kabbalion, it is kind of identified as everything flows out and in. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The pendulum swing manifests in everything. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates. So it's a pendulum-like movement, a tide-like ebb and flow, a high tide and a low tide, between two poles manifest on the physical, mental, or spiritual planes. Thus it is with all living things. They are born, they grow and die, and then are reborn. So rhythm accounts for the bewildering succession of moods, feelings, and other annoying and perplexing changes that we notice in ourselves. I'm going to use music once again as an example. I've followed jazz most of my life and really had a great passion for just great jazz improvisers like John Coltrane and Thelonious Monk and Stanley Turrentine, Keith Jarrett, just to name a few. So obviously, we talked earlier about vibrations and how harmonics are basically based on vibrations, degrees of vibrations, different wavelengths of sound, that some of them when played together, sound harmonious. Some of them sound very discordant. There's a lot of dissonance in them. And then you add the element of time into the mix, and you get even more dynamics. You could play a piece in like 9/4 time. I couldn't, but a really talented jazz player could. There's all these different time signatures in music that are kind of just add to the beauty of it and the creativity of it. That's one example of rhythm. And then another example of rhythm that I have recently discovered is astrology. I'm going to probably share a video right after I'm done with the Hermetic Principles where I'm kind of coming out of the closet as an astrologist, because as a Course in Miracles student, I was fairly reluctant to even reveal my interest in astrology until I heard somebody on Substack point out that there is a section in the epilogue to the clarification of terms in A Course in Miracles where that is very directly pointing at astrology as a legitimate way of basically making yourself miracle ready. You've noticed that my website is called Miracle Readiness, and that is sort of a state of preparedness. Miracle readiness could describe a state of preparedness for the opportunities to perform miracles when they come down the pike. And I've discovered, as I've started to learn more about my own natal chart in astrology, and then using elective psychology, which is using kind of the daily transits of the planets and what aspects that they have in relationship to your natal planets, you can basically predict the kind of day that you're going to have, and you can get some advice if you use books like Robert Hand's Planets and Transits to tell you how you might best show up for that sort of situation that you might find yourself in because of this. So I'm going to take you through a series of a cycle between two planets. In my natal chart, there's Jupiter, which is at 7 degrees 30 minutes of Aquarius, which happens to be where this big lineup of planets right now, it's kind of a parade of planets, are transiting right through that at the moment. And then one of those planets is Venus, and Venus yesterday, I think at 5 in the morning, 5 in the morning yesterday, Venus was conjunct my natal Jupiter at 7 degrees 30 minutes in Aquarius. So in astrology, conjunctions are basically like considered new beginnings or rebirths. And, this quote again from the Kabbalion, "Thus it is with all living things. They are born, they grow and die, and then are reborn." I'm going to just take you through a cycle of Venus in relationship to my natal Jupiter and kind of show you how it works. So there are major aspects in astrology and there are minor aspects in astrology, and that's just like major and minor chords in music. There are favorable aspects and there are challenging aspects. Challenging aspects generally have to do with squares, like 90 degrees or 45 degrees. An opposition, 180 degrees, is considered a challenging aspect. But with this couple of planets, they're almost all easeful, basically. The astrologers have been studying this for millennia now, and like several millennia. And they have discovered that both Jupiter and Venus are basically the benefic planets where almost every aspect that involves them has a nice edge to it. There are planets like Mars and Saturn that are very challenging, especially when they're square aspects or opposing aspects. But the easeful aspects are trines, 120 degrees. If you split a circle into 360 into 3 parts like a triangle, you get 120 degree aspects. And those are generally considered to be favorable aspects where you're not going to have a very challenging experience that day, even if it's Mars or Saturn that's involved in the transit. But like I said before, with Venus and Jupiter, they're generally benefic. And just to give you a little bit of a rundown about Venus, it's kind of some of the themes that run along with Venus are love and attraction, beauty, and kind of the mother's unconditional love. With the planet Jupiter, the themes that are kind of identified among them anyways are expansion, psychological growth, exploration and learning, and social consciousness. So we're going to just run you through my chart here, and we're going to start with yesterday, 5 a.m. Now, if you look all the way to the right of these screens and see the columns, then you can understand what the symbol, or in astrology it's called the glyph, for each planet is. So you can see the Jupiter glyph and the Venus glyph and then follow along. Venus was conjunct my natal Jupiter, and that's basically a new beginning for me in those areas of my life. We'll see as we move down the path just what it looked like. It's hard to know when it's happening, but in hindsight, usually you can start to appreciate the path, where the path began as you march down the path. On March 12th, Venus will sextile my natal Jupiter, and that will be in the sign of Aries, I believe. Yes. And even if this were, I'm not using the best example because these are two benefic planets, but if it were a malefic planet like Mars or Saturn, this would still be felt as an easeful because it's part of the trine series, like 60 degrees basically off of my natal planet. That's divisible, or that is part of 120 degrees, which means it's part of the triangle rather than the square. You can look at this chart and you can see that there is a blue line from where my Venus is to my Jupiter, my natal Jupiter. The natal series is the blue blue section inside, and the red section outside represents the planets where they appear in the sky at that time, in like on that actual date. Whereas the natal planet represented by the blue is where all the planets were located at the time of my birth. So you can see on March 12th that there is a blue line in between, a very dark blue line in between my Venus and my Jupiter. You'll also notice that my red Venus on the outside is also just about conjunct my blue Venus on the inner ring, which that kind of coincidence is happening all the time in astrology. What's worth understanding is that it's the transiting planet is the red, so that's the conjunction, or that's the trine with Jupiter. And it just so happens, coincidentally, that both Venuses are pretty lined up with that Jupiter on that day. And then on April 5th, my Venus, well, the Venus squares my natal Jupiter in Taurus, again at 7 degrees, 30 minutes of Taurus. And that is 90 degrees from my natal Jupiter. And if this were a malefic planet, this would be probably experienced as some challenge for me if one of those planets was malefic. But because they're not, it's probably going to be very nice for me. But there's a story unfolding, and the stories basically unfold and run their course as long as it takes to get back to the next conjunction of those two planets. And the next time that they are conjunct, they'll be in a different sign, in a different house. There's a lot of details to astrology. There's also the fact that planets go retrograde at times, which means that from our perspective here on Earth, they appear to be actually moving backwards. And so that can put a little hiccup into the rhythm, which, again, if you look at jazz, a really brilliant jazz improviser has all sorts of hiccups in the rhythm where they'll pause a little bit instead of follow the beat, right? This is the dynamics of both music and life. I'm going to use those two kind of analogies to go back to the as above, so below principle of Hermetics. Onward and upward, we go to April 30th, when Venus will trine my Jupiter. That would be in Gemini at 7 degrees 30 minutes. And you can see here that there is like a blue, again, a very thick blue line in between those two. And also you can look at the columns to the right, and you can see the red column represents the transiting planet, Venus, and the blue line, you can see my natal planet, Jupiter, at 7 degrees 30 in Aquarius. I'm pretty much a newbie at this. Most of the astrologers that I follow online can just speak very flowingly about these things. I am just beginning to speak about this stuff to the public around me, and so I'm still kind of hiccuping myself on all the details. Now on June 19th, Venus opposes my natal Jupiter, and I think that happens in Leo. if I'm not mistaken. And oppositions are considered challenging. But again, I've chosen 2 planets to make an example of that. That's not probably going to be the case in this story of love and attraction and maybe a new relationship that has showed up in my life. Just to mention, it could also be agape love. Agape love is the general true love, unconditional love for everyone and everything. And certainly, as I proceed on my spiritual pathway, that could be how this shows up for me, and that would basically be experienced as bliss. So I don't get to forecast the weather with the charts. I get to forecast the climate. You don't know exactly how it's going to show up, basically, until afterwards when you have 20/20 hindsight. Basically, from there, it's going to go into yet another trine. After that, after the opposition, it'll be a 120-degree trine, and then another square, and then another sextile, and then back to a new conjunction. And in between all of those, there are even other aspects. There are quintiles, which are, I think, 72 degrees, which is, if you split a circle into 5 parts, it would be 72 degrees, I think. I'm still learning, and that's considered kind of a faded aspect and very positive in most cases. But there are other ones that are less so, like quincunxes. Semi-squares are definitely not felt as positive. Sesquiquadrates, they all have to do with different degrees of the circle. And in astrology, just like in harmonics, you can divide a circle of 360 degrees by the number 2, the number 3, the number 4, the number 5, the number 6, come out with even numbers. And then you can find other numbers like 12, which is both divisible by 4 and 6 and 3 and 2. And you can add that to it if you want to get really, really into the weeds with astrology. You can get even more exacting with your predictions. But this is all, for the point of saying that, just like I showed you those waves, those people bobbing on the waves in the water in their little rings. What are those called? Sometimes life, we're kind of riding the crest of the waves, and sometimes we're riding the troughs, and we're in the troughs. And it's all part of the dynamics of life. It's all, the Hermetic Principles lay this all out. And I love the analogy of waves, because once we really begin to understand that this is how it works in this experience that we're having in life, we can more naturally and gracefully ride the waves, stay on top of them. Whereas when we don't understand these principles, we're more likely to get crushed by the waves, because we don't understand the principles that are at work, these hidden variables. So I think that's all I have to say today. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope that you will like and subscribe and share this with your friends. And I will see you again next time. Have a beautiful day filled with miracles and blessings. Bye for now.